All right, y'all. We've got one more excellent panel for you today. Water security and resilience. And our moderator is Mary Lasky. She's a program manager at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory. Mary, I live right down the street from you at Johns Hopkins. I think the world of the institution. You've got a great panel. Vince, Michael, and John. Water is important to everything we do. It's ever present across critical infrastructures. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you, and I'll keep an eye on Q&A. Folks should put their questions into Q&A. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Laura. And it's so nice that we're here today, and we really thank the All Hazard Consortium for including water as one of the lifelines. It certainly is a lifeline. You can do without a lot of other things, but water you can only do without for 3 days. So it's very important. And we take water for granted. We turn on the faucet and we expect it that it's going to turn on, and we can wash our hands or our clothes or our dishes and cook with it and water our lawns, etc. And so we just take everything for granted in this. But the InfraGard National Disaster Resilience Council at our summit in 2019 had a very moving and inspirational talk on water and the situation. And it was a call to action. And so we formed a working group and have been looking at water and the situation and what is going on, because in the country, we do have droughts, we do have water table going down, we have a lot of things that are really of concern that we would like to talk to you about today. So our panel has Michael Lambert, and Michael Lambert is an experienced emergency manager with long-standing focus looking at low probability, high consequence threats. He's currently the Emergency Preparedness Homeland Security Planner for the Houston-Galveston Area Council of Governments. And he is a member of the InfraGard National Disaster Resilience Council and is a founding member of the Water Security Working Group of that. He also serves on a number of local, state, and national kind of teams, and he has been working on the Texas Critical Infrastructure Protection Task Force. He's a frequent presenter on emergency management issues and also a trainer. We also have Craig Patla, who's the Vice President of Service Delivery for Connecticut Water Company. And he has been with the company for 31 years and has served in a variety of positions, but he also serves as Director of Emergency Operations for any of the many disasters that might befell Connecticut Water. He's a registered engineer in Connecticut and is a civil engineer. We also have Dr. Vince Tidwell, who's a distinguished member of the technical staff at Sandia National Laboratories. He has 30 years of combined experience there with water resource management, collaborative modeling, and energy water nexus. He played a lead role in realizing a new cross-cutting program on energy and water nexus within the Department of Energy. He's recently led a multi-institutional team to integrate water into long-term transmission planning for the United States. He and his colleagues combined the critical infrastructure protection models into climate integrated assessment modeling tools and to evaluate the resiliency of our nation's infrastructure. He's also served on Governor Richard's Blue Ribbon Task Force and is a co-author of Water, Energy, and Land Use chapter in the 2014 National Climate Assessment and the Energy chapter in 2018 in that same kind of document. John Organic finishes our panel with serving from the Electric Infrastructure Security Council, or as I think of it as the EIS Council, as the Water Sector Coordinator and Water Sector Director at also of Operational Architecture. In this capacity, he has coordinated an advisory body comprised of leaders and subject matter experts, both from the public and the private sectors, to develop the Water Sector Black Sky Playbook and Water Sector Resilience. He's also retired from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and a professional engineer with 25 years of experience. So welcome panel. And let's get started with, I just said that we take water for granted, but Mike Lambert, would you please talk about what happened to you in the big Texas freeze last year in February 2021 when water lines froze for many people? What is your personal experience and what advice do you have for people to be prepared? So turn it over.
Thank you, Mary. And I always love to hear my bio read, but as Mary knows and the rest of my colleagues from the Water Security Work Group, I prefer to think of myself as just a guy. Some of the stuff I do is somewhat interesting. To start off, let's visit for a moment about the what it means in Texas for it to get cold. It gets cold in Texas. I know we always think about it getting hot, but it does get cold. And when it gets cold, pipes freeze, water systems fail, and unfortunately, people die. Now, that is truly enigmatic or counter to what we emergency managers work for. Our job is to keep people alive, but in cold weather in Texas, because of the nature of Texas, people die. So last February, it got really cold, very cold. The entire state was below freezing for sometimes an extended period, depending upon where you were. Down in the valley, it was below freezing for way longer than there used to be below freezing. All 200, this was a signature event, all 254.
Michael, I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me see if I can fix that. Wow, that might not be easily done. I might have to switch over to, I have this problem sometime with Zoom. I tell you what, folks, I'm going to pull my headphones out and use my speakers. It might be a little bit different sounding, but it'll work. Can you hear me now? All right.
I think that's better. Go ahead, Michael.
Okay, all right. I was not set up for that. I had to reconfigure everything. I'm sorry. That particular problem has happened with Zoom several times, not regularly, but every once in a while. Anyway, let me just recircle back through and tell you it got cold in Texas. It got very cold. In fact, all 254 counties in the state were for the first time ever under a winter weather warning. That's never happened in Texas at all. 254 counties had that problem. It's also was the same problem they had in Oklahoma and Arkansas. So it was unprecedented, or not unprecedented, it's just highly unusual. So that was what we were facing then, just extremely cold weather. We had problems. Well, since you couldn't hear me in the beginning, I'm not sure if you heard me say this, but pipes do freeze in Texas when it gets cold. The whole structure here is built on keeping heat out, not keeping heat in. So when the weather gets cold, pipes freeze. Water utilities have problems. That's just natural. But it was exacerbated when the lights went out because, well, houses didn't, if you, in your house, you didn't have a source of heat to keep the pipes in your wall warm. Electricity at groundwater pumps went out, so the pumps didn't work, so that they tended to freeze. Water, we had freezing of pipes at utilities of all sorts. So it was just not a highly unusual circumstance to have water or pipes freeze and water go down in Texas, just the nature and the size. For the record, the water was actually down at my home, and I live downtown Houston. The water was out in my home for not very long, being out, but we were on a boil water notice until Sunday, which would have made it an entire week of the issue. Now, Mary asked how we weathered the storm. I fortunately live in a home that is young enough to have those PEX pipes, the ones that do not freeze or don't freeze very well. We were able to shut off our water, and our pipes worked, kept going. So personally, it was not an issue for us, but other people, my son included, after commiserating with him for quite a long time to turn off his water and drain his pipes, and him saying he would, he didn't, and so he had several $1,000s worth of damage. So in the end, when the lights came back on, you know, we had low water pressure for quite a long time because there were so many busted pipes. Mary, I believe you asked me if I had recommendation for folks, and we had a cache of water, a substantial cache of water. My wife is involved in emergency management too. We're not preppers, but we're preparedness people, so we were not in trouble with water. And those that can afford the resources to cache some water, I strongly recommend it. The other thing that I strongly recommend is you drain your pipes. I'll have more to say as we go on, but that basically tells you what it was like during the actually only 4 days of no lights in Texas, but the impact on the water utilities was pretty substantial. Sorry for the problem with the headphones. I hope you can hear me now.
Well, we definitely wanted to hear you, so thank you, Michael. And so, Craig, one of the things that fascinates me completely is that Connecticut water is in Texas. So Connecticut water had a role in the Texas freeze in 2021. So what was your role, and what lessons did you learn from home?
Well, Mary, you know, you said it very well in your intro, and we like to say that the degree to which a society is considered civilized is directly related to the degree it has access to potable water. And there's no doubt of that. And when we see that, we see the decivilizing of society when lack of water prolongs for days after an event. And unfortunately, in my career, I've had the opportunity to deal with many events as the director of our emergency operations center up here in the Northeast, as we've taken on, whether it's a winter event or one of the many hurricanes that have come into New England, where we've seen outages for double-digit days post-event from an electrical standpoint. I should say, and I'm sure Dr. Tidwell will balance this in after, but the dependency on the water sector to power is whole. We are wholly dependent upon the electrical grid for delivery of water, unless we have emergency generators. Now, more about that. So Texas Canyon Lake Water we have a sister company down there by virtue of our ownership model. They sit right in the middle of Austin and San Antonio, so they were definitely within that swath of cold weather that did hit the state during that February period. I was asked to come in and lead their emergency operations center primarily because they were in it. They were in the disaster as it was unfolding, and sometimes the worst place to lead a recovery effort is from within what you're recovering from. It's just very difficult. So I was able to jump in, and through the technology that we're enjoying here today, I was able to lead the efforts to begin the recovery process there in Texas. Now here in New England, we're used to cold weather. We're getting a blizzard tomorrow. as a matter of fact, or Saturday, I should say. And we prepare our infrastructure to take that on. In Texas, not so much. The biggest issue in Texas is that the buried depths of the pipe doesn't prevent freezing. So if you get a cold snap like we did in February, the likelihood of service lines freezing is high because there's just not enough ground cover over them to protect them for freezing. The ground cover does provide insulation to that freezing. And typically the water mains, water under movement will not freeze, but water in the mains in the streets typically won't freeze, but the water in service lines, which oftentimes will not be moving, will. And that's what we saw in Texas. So what ended up happening was as the temperature dropped, those service lines froze, many of them broke. And then when there was a brief thaw, I'm talking 33 degrees, those lines let go and began a massive leaking through service lines. So much that our entire system evacuated itself of water. And we couldn't make enough water out of our treatment plants to fill the system because all of the water was going out through the leaks. So as you might imagine, that was quite a scenario that we needed to recover from in due step. And we did. I mean, it was hard, but we did. We were able to isolate neighborhoods and service lines, isolate by shutting them off, and begin to rebuild the water column through the communities that we serve there. When I say the water column, I mean take it from the source water all the way out to the highest tank and start building that water column back in so that we can begin to provide water back to the distribution system of service there. A lot of people think about potable water and our jobs as water utilities as providing drinking water. Well, our primary reason and cause out there is fire protection. And so we needed to build the water column back into the distribution system so that we could provide fire protection to the communities that we serve. We can get bottled water from Costco, Walmart, or any of those, but fire protection is needed to be established primarily. And Michael, that's why you had that boil order for as long as you did in your community there, because when you evacuate a system and then you fill it back in, you are unsure of the water quality and its potability. So you do need to run the testing regimen behind that, but fire protection primarily was provided initially. So boy, I feel like I went off course there a little bit, Mary. You asked me how I got involved with Texas, and I took you through Texas. So I'm happy to stand down now and let the next question go, and I'll come back in as you choose.
Okay, you brought up some really interesting kind of points, though, Craig. Thank you. And John, Craig and Michael have been talking about electric power and the water. And so what other kind of critical infrastructures have you been concerned about in cascading events? And what other issues have you been studying as well as about water?
Well, we have kind of a large portfolio, and one of the more interesting things is when Michael mentions extreme events. As many people know, with the EIS Council, we deal with a real extreme event or a couple of things. One is called a black sky event, which would be a large footprint or large affected area that would sustain a power outage for a long period of time. We're talking more than a couple of weeks or a month. And this would have a real debilitating effect. I mean, it far outpaces whatever emergency power units people would already have. If it doesn't outpace the generator itself, it would outpace the fuel supply. So you could see in terms of that we've been dealing with these extreme events, and they may be on the far side of that. On the other hand, we feel that is a very useful construct because it really forces you to think outside the box. When you start to look at risk and risk assessment, when it comes to water sector, the basic question is always what can go wrong? Okay, so you ask specifically about cascading effects, Mary. Okay, one of the more interesting things that took place was very recently with the pandemic. When we first started, everything was started to be closed down immediately. And as a result, people didn't travel in cars, as we all know. And as a result of that, nobody used gasoline. And because nobody used gasoline, there was no ethanol production. And because there was no ethanol production, lo and behold, we found out that our food grade or food quality carbon dioxide wasn't being made. So there was a kind of a feedback loop that went back into the water sector. And could this have been seen ahead of time? Probably not. Should it be seen ahead of time? It could be. So these are some of the more interesting aspects that arise. I mean, we're talking about the consolidation or the entire scene being a complex adaptive system of interdependent critical infrastructures. Where these issues arise are unpredictable. The point is unpredictable. So that's why we at the EIS Council really focus not so much on the risk and risk management, but more on resilience. It's going to go wrong, so start planning for it. And these cascading effects will pop up anywhere, and just be kind of ready to be able to handle. I don't know if that answers the question.
That was just really good, John. Thank you. And I liked your example. So Vince, can you live out in the West, and the West is going through droughts. And so can you give us your insights and thoughts about the long-term prospects about the West and what you're seeing?
Sure, happy to do that. So, I mean, I guess where I would start is that, drought itself is nothing new in the West. In fact, our water infrastructure, our water management systems have all been designed around the idea of trying to mediate, to the extent that we can, the effects of drought in the West. We built reservoirs to store water. We've built conveyance systems to move water from one place to another. We've even built treatment systems that allow us to access new supplies of water, like seawater or brackish water, all to deal with that variability of supply that we're used to. And so we've also established, pretty complex system of treaties, water, river compacts, water rights, which define who gets what water when water supplies are limited. So we've built around this idea of drought, but even so, even with all of our efforts, I think we're seeing drought becoming more and more of a disruptive force in the West. In fact, we're experiencing one of the worst droughts in recent decades right now in the West. I just looked up and it showed that 87% of the West is experiencing severe drought, with 63% experiencing extreme drought. So, and in fact, for the first time, Tier 1 water shortage has been called on the Colorado River system by the Bureau of Reclamation, which means that, there are a certain set of disruptions to water supply to certain users based on their seniority. And this is because Lake Mead has hit levels that it has not since it was first being filled back in the 1930s. So it's at unusually low levels right now. And so with this system of infrastructure and policies, why are we seeing drought? Why is it still a problem? Well, you can probably figure out a big part of it has to do with just growing demand for water in the West. In 2020, we had 25 million acres of land that was under irrigation and 116 million people living in the West. In fact, there was an increase of 25 million people just from 2000 to 2020. So you can get an idea of how fast our demand for water is growing. So, that puts stress on our system. We've also been, over a similar period of time, realizing that, the environment, we've been impacting the environment with our water use. And so we're trying to make amends, trying to make more and more water available to our environment. But at the same time, our demand for anthropogenic needs is growing. So that's putting stress on the system. And then, of course, we all know about climate change. And I mean, we've definitely been seeing increasing temperatures over the past 20 years or better, which are increasing evaporative demands for water, more and more erratic precipitation patterns that we're seeing, more variability. And even so, with the higher temperatures, it's, our infrastructure system was created and optimized for, spring snow melts in the West, that occur in the late May, June timeframe. But as temperatures increase, we're seeing earlier and earlier snow melts, and our system isn't really optimized for that. So that, yet again, is another challenge that we're facing out West. And so you put all this together, and it looks like, drought is something we're going to have to get a handle on. It's going to be persistent. It's going to intensify unless we do something different. And fortunately, we have a lot of the, opportunities right in our hands. I mean, we've got all kinds of conservation technology, low flow appliances in our homes. We can xeriscape our yards, drip irrigation, and a whole variety of others. We're driving down costs for water treatment, which is making things like salt water or brackish water, produced water, recycled wastewater more affordable for us to use. We could even take more draconian changes and changing the way our diets look, moving away from beef, which are very high water use foods that we eat. And finally, there are all kinds of ways for more adaptive management. So managing the ways we operate our reservoirs, the way we allocate water, water markets, and other things are providing other ways to help manage droughts better. But I have a feeling they're going to continue to be a problem going into the future that we're going to have to deal with.
Okay, I'm glad that you mentioned some of those ideas that we could be using. So Vince just talked about too little water, but Michael, can you talk as an emergency manager? You've handled hurricanes, and so especially one in Galveston, Texas. And so can you share about lessons learned and an important story about Galveston and the hurricane?
Sure. Texas is a huge place. I know we Texans like to say that a lot, but with regards to the geography of the state, it covers coastal plains, high plains, desert, and several other different types of geography. So focusing in here on the coastal area, we're in Hurricane Alley here in Houston and Galveston. Of course, Louisiana has suffered more hurricanes than we have, but I think if you put it on if you looked at it over the period of time, we probably have had as many, if not slightly more hurricanes in this area than they have in Louisiana. I stand to be corrected on that if I'm wrong. But hurricanes aren't really our problem. Hurricanes do great damage, not from a flood perspective. Hurricanes do great damage from the wind, from the storm surge, from the tornadoes. There's no doubt that they are great damage producers, but they're not great flood producers. They do cause flooding. What we've really seen in the last couple of decades here in my particular 13 county area of responsibility is it's the tropical storms that really do the hit. So for instance, Harvey, which I believe you're referencing, was actually two, perhaps even arguably three different storms. When it went ashore in the mid-Gulf region of Texas, it was a vicious windstorm that did horrific damage. And then it backed out into the Gulf and made its way up the coast and decided to come in the Galveston area as a tropical storm. And it liked it so much that it decided to stay for several days and brought all of its rain buddies. So we had 4 days of almost continuous rain. And after it decided to leave us, it went a little bit to the east and took out eastern part of Texas and the western part of Louisiana. So that was huge rain from that. Now, we don't really need tropical weather to have huge rainstorms in Houston. As a matter of fact, 4 years to the day before the lights went out, we had a massive flood, one of actually 4 that happened within about an 18-month period that did significant damage. Now, you ask about, what does too much water do? Well, too much water, because wastewater systems tend to be, they're low because they use gravity to feed them, tend to be right along the river where they clean the water and they discharge, or in Texas case, bayous or creeks. And when those flood, and there is one in particular in my mind along Brays Bayou that's flooded several times, a wastewater plant that's actually all of the waste that comes out of the flood in that actually flows through Houston because of places west of town. So we have flooding in wastewater treatment. During Harvey, I was in Galveston County at their Office of Emergency Management at the time. One of the areas that we thought would be just decimated actually received no direct impact from the storm at all, but they were a barrier island that got their water from East Texas. And when the when the tropical storm moved over East Texas, it wiped out their water supply. So here was a part of my county that had no water, but no damage, just no water. And we had to deal with that. I was just on a rather extensive seminar call actually this morning with Critical Lifeline folks, and the people from the food distribution centers in Houston were talking about the fact that when it floods, they can't get to their distribution centers to distribute food. So too much water is a huge problem, and it impacts the water security. By that I mean the ability for us to get water to people, because it can wipe out our water resources. Most of the water that moves around this part of the state moves through open canals from the source to the open canals, or through the open canals to the whatever storage facility or treatment facility. So they can actually be washed out by excessive floods. And we very nearly lost the levee that holds back a large water supply in Galveston County. That would have, the loss of that water supply would have significantly curtailed the ability of our refineries to operate. So too much water is a problem. I don't want Vince's world, but we have the other end of the spectrum. Does that pretty much cover what you did there, Mary?
Yeah, that's great, Michael. And Craig, from a utility, how do you all handle like the hurricanes and the water, and how do you make decisions about who's going to get their water when things happen?
Well, in Connecticut since 2008, we've had a number of tropical storms, named storms, that have come in and hit us. We haven't had anything above what we call a classification 1 hurricane to come into Connecticut. But as Michael suggests, it's more the rain that can do some damage there when you're talking about those tropical storms. What our biggest risk, honestly, is failure of our dams. So our dams are impounding reservoir systems. They are not flood control dams. So they are as full as we can make them most of the time, so that we can provide the water to the treatment plants that serve the communities. When a storm rolls up the coast and we take that and we get storms of 8 inches, 10 inches, or even 12 inches of rain, the influx of water into those facilities and do put at risk the structures that are impounding them, the dams. And we primarily have earthen dams, so overflow, overtopping, washing, all the enemy of earthen dams especially in severe, very high flow rates. So the downstream effect of people's loss of property and or life is real. We've gone through a number of events like that where we've had to institute evacuations, and as well, if we lose the dam, we lose the reservoir, we lose the ability to serve water. So that's a chain right there that has instant impact. The winds themselves, as they come ashore here in Connecticut, we're not unique. Very similar to the rest of the country. We're living with electrical infrastructure and distribution systems that's by far outdated its useful life and design life, and the vegetative impact on that distribution system is severe. When we have a windstorm, a hurricane, or tropical storm that rolls into Connecticut, it's the trees that take out the falling trees that take out the electrical distribution system, and it causes us to have 100% reliance on emergency power generators for the most part. And as lessons have been learned through each successive event that we've had, we now have generators at all of our hundreds of facilities across the state of Connecticut to ensure that when it's not if anymore, it's when the electrical distribution system does fail, we have the ability to provide water, recognizing our role, as I said earlier, about establishing that civilized part of the society that we live in, so that we're always days ahead of the power company in our area here as far as restorations. Matter of fact, for the last 3 hurricanes that have come to the state of Connecticut, we haven't had any outage of water provision to any of the customers that we serve. But it's all been on days and days, and then some more days of running on emergency power in the form of generators.
Congratulations on what you've done doing there and having so many generators. That's really, congratulations on that.
Well, Mary, I have the scars to prove it. So.
Okay. So John, let me turn to you and ask you, because the EIS Council has held for the last several years something that I think has been really significant, and it's worldwide, something called EarthX. And so I'm sure that there's been some lessons learned from that, and improving water resiliency and throughout the country. And can you describe the water sector landscape across the United States for us?
Well, EarthX, thank you for mentioning that. We at the EIS Council have been pretty proud of the exercise that we've had, and it's over the last 5 years, it's really gotten better. And I can assure you that this year's exercise will even surpass what we had last year. We've had quite a few people, from 12,000 or so people participate in over 40 countries. So many of the people have an opportunity to really get to look at a widespread perspective on a widespread damage scenario. We've had cyber scenarios, we've had the flood scenarios, the climate change scenarios, et cetera, fire. So we really get involved in that regard. All of us, we all have different skills in the EIS Council, different knowledge bases, and we all participate in formulating. My background in the military, I spent a lot of time in developing or participating in the development of war games. So the ability to run scenarios, realistic type scenarios, and scenarios even when you have some field interaction is always very valuable to teaching points and making things happen, the aha factor sort of take place. So we found that we get a lot of good information as a result of the EarthX. This past year, I participated with EPA. We participated in a consortium of water companies, for example, and we played it in phases, all the 3 phases, 2 phases of the exercise, and then we had a 3rd phase where we went over in depth lessons learned at each phase. So in that regard, I think there's a lot to learn. I think the participants learn quite a bit. We write them up. We develop what we call the roadmap, and then we use a lot of the lessons learned from the exercise and plow it back into the next exercise. So I hope I answered your question more directly. It was a little
Great.
long-winded, but
No,
it
that's
is a
fine.
good exercise. We're very proud, like I said, of it. And I think the people that have played the water sector, sometimes you have to kind of have a little bit of an imagination, because some of the things that apply are very urgent in one part of the country may not be as urgent in another. But we try to make that, smooth that over as best we can.
Great, thank you. I have led teams doing the EarthX exercise since its very beginning, and they've all been really valuable. So thank you. And the National Disaster Resilience Council has participated every year. So Vince, I know you've had some major thoughts and what we can do to improve the value of water, strengthen the value of water by individuals, by communities and organizations. Would you please share some of your ideas so that our audience can have those too?
Sure. So, I mean, the way we value water is important because it really helps us to use water more effectively when we value it properly, make sure it goes to its most beneficial need. But valuing water, it's pretty tricky because we value water in a lot of different ways. In some cases, it's pretty clear. It has a very clear economic value connected with it. That's, like when we pay our water bills, right? We pay for the water that we use in our homes, usually on the order of a few pennies per gallon, maybe. On the other hand, we have farmers who, again, may pay for water from the irrigation district in which they're getting their water. They may pay on the order of a few pennies per 1,000 gallons. And then, industry probably, or at least the self-supplied industry is probably paying somewhere in between those two extremes. But basically, there's a big disparity in terms of how water is valued, at least the economics value that we're paying for it. And a large part of that's because what we pay for water is just really what it costs to deliver that water to the user. It doesn't include a lot of the other value that water brings with it. So the cost of water in agriculture and industry too, if you stop and think about it, it's usually a very small cost relative to the overall product that it's producing. There are other more important costs relative to those producing those items. In the same way in our homes, we probably pay a lot more, per unit for our other infrastructure, electricity, internet, cable, TV, et cetera, than we do for water. And again, that's because we're not really paying the value of water. And we start to understand that value when it gets interrupted, right? And so when there's scarcity, the value of water goes way up. And I met a lot of industry, power plants and others will pay a lot of money to make sure that their water supply is not interrupted. And so, and very often they're paying a lot more money to have options available to them than what they're actually paying for their day-to-day water. So kind of crazy, but that kind of scarcity of water value is also something that we, to some extent, may pay for or not. But water is valued in a lot of other ways. Think about the environment. It's absolutely necessary for aquatic habitat, for wetlands, riparian areas. And what's that really worth? What is the worth of water to the environment? And who will ever pay for it? We also value water just for its existence, its aesthetic value to us. We're attracted to lakes and rivers and waterfalls. We build fountains and water features in our cities, even in our own backyards, right? And what is that worth to us? And I mean, we do pay a little bit for that, in the sense that if you build a house on a lake or on a beautiful river, you're usually going to pay more for that amenity than, if you're a few roads away from, the river or lake. But nevertheless, there's a real value to that existence that often is very hard to put a dollar value on. We also ascribe traditional, even religious values to water in many cultures. And so, there's been a lot of work that's gone into trying to figure out how to value water and how to bring all these different kinds of values together. And to my knowledge, there's no silver bullets out there, because it is such a complex issue, and all these different kinds of values. But, we are making some progress. Water markets are emerging where allow people to lease or sell water rights among different water users, those with very senior rights versus more junior rights. This allows water to move around, and it allows it to move to its highest, at least economic value. But again, and that's valuable, and it helps to reduce wasted water. It helps to, get every drop out of the water. But again, it doesn't solve all of these issues, like who pays for the environment. If you push me, I think the best step that we can take is that we need a better informed public. We need everyone to really start thinking about water and understanding water and what is the worth of water to them, not just when it comes out of their tap, but in the environment and all the other ways that they may or may not value water, to understand how secure the water is that they're depending on, and how their own usage patterns impact the availability and the overall security of that resource. And so, just bottom line, you can't value what you don't know. And so, valuing water is tricky. But I think we just understand it better.
Yes, you truly are passionate about this, and I hope all of our listeners are thinking about that too. We have a couple of questions from our audience that I would like to go to, and then I'll ask a final question of all of you. And so the question is, how do you determine when flooding begins to create an impact, since the NFIP, and I'm not sure what the NFIP is not designed to determine this type of information? Anybody?
I think I'm going to have to read that.
Okay.
Well, I can tell you, and there's a lessons learned opportunity here. And I can tell you the first flooding event that we had, our emergency action plan actually called for people to be out on dams measuring rate of rise and impact of the water rise on our dams. And there were a few folks who actually died during that Hurricane Irene in the Vermont area doing that very same activity. And we immediately modified our emergency action plan such that we became more proactive and based our evacuation and emergency actions on forecast rather than in event data. So that's what we have done in Connecticut, just to be more proactive and addressing the safety of our people.
So, Michael, in Houston as a planner, what do you do about planning for hurricanes?
Well, I thank our good friend Jules for reminding me what NFIP stands for. Flooding begins when there's impacts. Whether or not the federal government is going to roll in and pay for it at all, that's a different question. That's a recovery question. From a response perspective, when somebody's impacted, when somebody can't get to their house or their place of business or the goods and services that they need, or when they've had to leave their house because of water. And my family home flooded once. My wife's family home flooded 3 times before they bought her out. You know, that's a flood. So the reason the question's a little difficult for me to get my arms around is because I'm an emergency manager. You know, it's a flood when someone calls and says help, you know, or I find out someone needs help. Here it floods. We get street flooding. We get street flooding on a quite regular basis. But the kind of flooding that, you know, we think about that really causes infrastructure damage or causes downstream damage, we get that maybe once a year, maybe twice a year. It can be significant. I hope that comes close to answering the question, but from emergency management perspective, from the world in which I live, it's a problem when people are at risk.
Yes. So thank you. Okay, for a last question for each one of you on the panel, what advice do you have for our listeners? So let's start with John. Let's start with you. What advice do you have for our listeners?
Well, from pretty much our theme with the EIS Council is to really think beyond the normal. In other words, what the normal is all the time. Think outside the box. I can remember the statement that somebody in Oregon made in the water sector a little while ago that said, you know, we always plan for pandemic, but we never believed this pandemic would be this great. So the lesson to be learned there is really try to think in terms of what can go wrong, even beyond what I planned for. So really try to get into that level beyond what it is, an extension of just what we're familiar with.
Okay. Craig, why don't you go next?
Have a plan. Practice it, use it. Don't let it just be something that sits on your shelf. You have to have it. You have to use it. You'd be surprised at the Texas response, how in many ways there was just not a plan to address the issue as it unfolded. So as simple as it gets, Mary, have a plan and be ready to utilize it.
Okay, good. Michael, what's your suggestion?
Well, our failures to prepare basically are built around 3 different human issues. And I talk about these all the time in my presentations. One is the failure of imagination, the failure to be able to see something that you just can't imagine happening. I spent a decade working on and then going around the country speaking on issues related to pandemic flu. And matter of fact, the last presentation I did was at the state of Texas during the February when COVID was raining down upon us. We would always get great response to those talks, and people would come up, they'd rush the stage to talk about it. And then they turn around and go back, and it just basically, you know, when they left, they forgot. So you have to get past, I think John basically was right. You have to get past the moment or that tendency to only work on what you've seen or what you can see. You have to think outside the box. On a personal level, I'd say stockpile water. You can't, it's not like electricity. Electricity goes out, you have a generator, you fire up your generator, you have battery system, you fire up your battery system. You can't fire up a reservoir, at least not here in my part of downtown Houston. So I'd say for individuals, stockpile water. For organizations, if you know your water system, where your water comes from, who's responsible for it, know your emergency managers. And that won't, if the water goes away, that won't make the water come back, but it will help you know how to deal with it, help you know when you might get it back. So those are my suggestions for how to be prepared for water, a water outage.
Okay. Vince, what do you think?
Well, I mean, we didn't kind of planned this beforehand amongst the panelists, but I think all of us are kind of on the same idea of planning and the importance of planning. And I agree so much there as well. And, you know, a lot of what we've already talked about is more the emergency planning, but I would also say there's opportunity to engage in, when it comes to water, looking at water supply and thinking about the long-term supply and how you're balancing that long-term supply with other issues around the environment and traditional water uses like agriculture and other things. And so there's great opportunity for planning there, and the opportunity to engage and, you know, to have your voice heard in those areas, as well as kind of on the emergency side of things.
Mary, you're muted.
Thanks. Could you just tell us a couple of words about the cross-cutting program on the water, energy water nexus that you did for the Department of Energy? Just because we had a question about working together across various kinds of departments and the various critical infrastructures. So
Was that aimed at me, I'm assuming?
yes,
Okay.
yes, it's aimed at you because I read in your history that you did this for the Department of Energy, and it seems like it would answer this question too.
Sure. Well, I mean, yes, within the Department of Energy, there were a number of people that were coming together and realizing that water plays a huge role in energy generation overall, and vice versa, that energy is incredibly important to the water sector as well. And realizing that the Department of Energy had, you know, quite a bit of work going on all across the department, but it was scattered across all kinds of different programs, from coal plants to, you know, biofuel production to oil and gas development. And so we were able to get energy interest going at all levels, including all the way up to you know, congressional interest in these issues, that was able to get importance of doing research around this nexus of water and energy built into the energy bill and other places to get DOE working, and as well as reaching out and beginning to work with you know, Department of Interior and others, that EPA, that have a stake in water. And so, yeah, it really kind of started as a groundswell of folks working in the industry or doing research, and over the years, just helping to get it recognized at higher and higher levels, both within the government, but also within our, you know, administration.
So thank you. Very interesting work. So thank you to all of the panel. Just appreciate Craig and John and Michael and Vince, all of your work and preparing for the panel and your work that you're doing with water. And thank you for the audience for being with us.
Thank you, Mary. Thanks, panel. And it's now my job to thank everybody across track 3, from our moderators to our panelists and to our audience, because everybody has really come together. That's what this community does, to put some issues on the table, share knowledge, and make connections. The All Hazards team is going to take a well-deserved evening off, but then get right back to work tomorrow, packaging up all of these slides and resources and links. And if you've attended today, then you're going to get some concierge treatment in a few weeks and have a lot of materials delivered back to your inbox. So they'll be right at your fingertips. I want to say thank you too to Tom and Laura and Abel and many, many other volunteers who were behind the scenes making this whole 3-day session possible and making it run.